It's the Thanksgiving episode. So you know what that means. It means we need to give thanks to our heroes. That's right, the game developers. Right now, as we speak, they are being tied and chained to their desks so that they can work crunch. Crunch is a really cool concept used by the game industry where salaried employees get to work an exorbitant amount of extra hours and not get compensated for it. And they do this so that we can play FIFA 2021 on time. Thanks. People are declaring Carrion a Metroidvania. As you know, I am here to purify the genre's definition and inform you that this is not the case. This is closer to an action-adventure title with puzzle elements, which naturally causes it to straddle the absolute hell out of the Metroidvania genre. This also means that game journalists will take the path of least resistance when it comes to labeling these things and not try to suss out the nuance of what the game actually is. Why do that? Why does it even matter if we just bastardize words until we barely know what the hell we're talking about? I don't know about you, but I am getting fatigued from every 2D game that has a melee attack or an open world getting slapped as a Metroidvania. This becomes frustrating as a customer because I don't know if what I'm about to play favors certain gameplay elements of the Metroidvania genre, or if the person or even the developer that has labeled the game as such knows what those elements are. While I believe that Metroidvania has distinct gameplay elements, those elements can be broad in definition. And this is where I think a lot of miscommunication comes from. So if you tell me this game is a Metroidvania, you may just mean you can explore, which may be one of the gameplay elements in the genre that you favor the most. So when I pick it up, I'm let down because my expectations are not the same as whatever the hell yours are. When independent games first started gaining momentum, there was this deluge of platformers. This was due to the fact that platformers are easy to make, and probably also had something to do with Super Meat Boy's meteoric rise in popularity. Platformers at that time also had a certain appeal and call to nostalgia, which I think we are now seeing with Metroidvanias. Platformers have kind of become passé, and now we are in this phase of Metroidvania saturation. Most of these Metroidvanias aren't really even Metroidvanias. But I'm beginning to talk in a circle, so let's actually discuss the game. Carrion is a nice little parasitic package. It draws inspiration from one of my all-time favorite horror films, The Thing. My personal preference, of course, has to be John Carpenter's 1982 version, not whatever that disgrace was that came out in 2011. You're not in a snowy clime, but that's okay. You're not instilling distrust amongst your crewmates, but that's alright. You are going on a murderous rampage, and that is pretty fun. This is a type of game that, once you've played it, you probably are not going to feel compelled to revisit it. That's because while the game is fun, the gameplay itself is kind of weak. The main loop of the game is solving rooms and puzzles. There's not much to master mechanically in the game. Combat and movement is paper thin. In this game, you move by holding a click in a direction on the screen, and that doesn't really feel good. It's about the same with a controller, and I would absolutely under no circumstances recommend using a controller. The game's music's kind of awful. Music in a game like this is tricky. You have an arrangement of music that is supposed to invoke horror, suspense, and stress, and it does. You're a monster. But listening to that kind of music for hours on end dilutes the power of the music, and also kind of bores you after a while in an irritating way. You become desensitized to it. I don't know what the solution to this is, which is one reason I don't want to criticize it too harshly. I don't really want to even call the music awful. It's just not a good fit here. Actually, it is. That's the problem. This is a situation where if the music was used in a movie, it would be competent. But due to the nature of how games are, it just doesn't work. I guess you could remedy this by muting the soundtrack and putting some dark synth on, or K-pop or something. It's tricky. I don't really fault the developer for this. Let's talk about maps. The game doesn't have one. Why? Is it because it wouldn't make sense thematically? Please give me a break. You're depositing massive wads of meat all over the goddamn place. Now, it's not clear if these are extensions of you or your conscious, but wow, it sure would make sense if they were. And once you drop one of these massive loads of meat off, you could, I don't know, gain a map of that area, some kind of hive presence. I think most people would see this as fitting in thematically just fine, and could be seen as growing out the hive mind or something along those lines. I got lost for like 30 minutes, going into a circle like a complete dipshit. You know what would have helped me? A map. You know what did help me? A map. I looked one up. Some gracious soul constructed one. Thank you. I hope you have a great sleep for the rest of your life. Unfortunately, the map I did find was essentially a walkthrough, which was kind of a bummer, because I like to avoid those type of things on a fresh playthrough, but it's not that big a deal. Once I realized where the hell I was, I got back on track, and I didn't need it anymore. The lack of an in-game map is also why I did not bother with trying to get 100% in this game, because the whole reason I got lost in the first place was because I was going back to get containment units that are optional. If you're going to have a game with exploration elements, put a map in it. So why is this not a Metroidvania? There's an open world. You get more powerful to unlock new areas. There's some puzzles. There's optional areas. The world is pretty big. It ticks off a lot of the boxes for a Metroidvania, right? Yes and no. This is the problem with the Metroidvania genre. Has it become an umbrella term like action adventure at this point? Or does it have very specific elements? But due to people not fully realizing what those are, the definition of Metroidvania has become wider than what it actually is. What bars this from being a full-blown Metroidvania? There's a few things. While it is true that you need certain power-ups to progress in this game, there are no movement upgrades, and no areas requiring said movement upgrades to access. This, in my opinion, is absolutely vital and one of the things that make Metroidvanias stand apart. Movement is important, and sometimes Metroidvanias can squeak by without having too many movement options because they are stronger in other areas, or the movement options they do have are well tuned for the game. If we lean into the Vania aspect, there is no leveling. Please do not conflate power-ups with leveling up. It simply is not the same thing. There is no item acquisition. Symphony of the Night, as an example, has a plethora of items that can drop, that if you wanted to, you could grind for. And importantly, these items change the way the game is played at a combat level. The game elements that Carrion does have, while true that Metroidvania also possess those things, does not push the needle far enough to brand it as a Metroidvania. It's like when people used to, and still do, call any action RPG released on PC a Diablo clone. Diablo is an action RPG, but it has an emphasis on chasing gear. Would you believe that people would call a game like Arcanum of Steamworks and Magicka a Diablo clone? They do, and they did. Years ago, I originally bought Arcanum because I had been told explicitly that the game was a Diablo clone. Imagine my surprise when it wasn't. If you're a big Metroidvania fan, don't look to this game as an itch to your addiction, but if you're a horror fan, I do think it's worth a spin. Even if you just like puzzles, albeit fairly simple ones, I would give it a go. Change. Biomass is a mechanic in this game that's where you gain more and more meat, you get new abilities at the expense of old abilities. I'm not really against this system, but what I don't like is that when you enter into a new area, you will have a pool in which to shoot your meat, and this is normally kind of a flag, if you will, from the developer to say, hey, there's a puzzle coming up, you probably don't need to be maximum meat status, so here's your pool, shoot your load in there, and go in there and solve a puzzle. I don't understand why there wasn't just an option to subtract your meat, or use your meat in different ways. When you have maximum meat, there is a carapace option that hardens you. I don't know why you couldn't have had an option like that to use your excess meat, but go into a smaller form with more defense or something along those lines. Anyways, it's not a huge deal, but a lot of times when you enter into a new area, you will see that pool and you will probably wander into the room after to see what the puzzle is, and invariably you're gonna have to just waltz right back in there, shoot that load in that pool, and then walk back in, solve the puzzle, walk back, get your meat, and leave. And it's a shitty rhythm, and you shouldn't have to keep blasting loads into pools.